Well, all right, we're back. Unexpectedly, I did a 2 hour video yesterday towards the middle of the day. Wasn't intended to make it 2 hours, but that's what it took, folks. So we were here to do the necessary, and I felt like that was necessary. It's early for me to be on YouTube. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, and the reason why I'm here and drinking my first cup of coffee to get myself rolling is because I wake up this morning and I look at the headlines on my cell phone, and I'm expecting to see progress on all sides in the prosecution of the Third World War. And what do I see on CNN? A story, and this is their title to their story. Okay, and I'm gonna pull a Sam Mitchell. Sam Mitchell, my buddy at Collapse Chronicles. Hey Sam, how you been? He likes to read articles and comment on them, and I have not been doing that on my channel. For one thing, he does that, and I have no value to add in that regard. He does a fine job, and we don't need a bunch of people doing the same thing, but I am doing that today. I am going to read an article right off of my cell phone. I'm going to read an article with my glasses on and comment on this article. The title of the article at CNN, their title, not mine. Delay means death. We're running out of ways to adapt to the climate crisis, new report shows. Here are the key takeaways. I think they have like 5. I think this is going to be kind of funny, okay? This is going to be, I'm a little off script here. I'm going to enjoy myself. They say there's going to be 5 key takeaways. Rachel Ramirez at CNN wrote this. I think we already have the key. I think we already have the key takeaway. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe I'm sitting here live on camera cracking up. I don't know. Here are the key takeaways. I think the key takeaway was right in the title. Delay means death. Excuse me. It's too early in the morning for this shit. All right. I just had to do that. I just had to have a good laugh, okay? I know it's not very professional of me, but I just had to have a good laugh. Start again, shall we? This is CNN, okay, where every I know this is Rachel Ramirez, but actually every article on CNN about climate change is ghostwritten by Rosie Scenario, okay? Rosie Scenario, who no one has ever met, writes all the climate change articles at CNN. So this article is also ghostwritten by Rosie Scenario. The byline is Rachel Ramirez. So I'm going to read this, and this is pretty harrowing stuff for anybody who just drops onto CNN on day 6 of World War III. So they're kind of thinking no one's going to actually read this. They're going to go straight to the Ukraine stuff, doom scroll Ukraine, jump on YouTube and doom scroll Ukraine, and they're never going to get to this one, even though it has this nice clickbaity title, "Delay Means Death." Rosie, you're losing your grip, okay, girl? I mean, come on, you can do better than this, can't you? Delay means death. Seriously? So let's read this. I mean, we could really stop right there, right? We can stop. We don't even need the 5 takeaways. We have the one takeaway: delay means death. Now, this series, The Age of Chaos, is about where we are, how this is going to play out. Yesterday, I did a 2-hour rant about about the preferred path through all this, which is called the controlled demolition, which is not really on the table. No one's really talking about the controlled demolition. So this is not talking about that either. This is talking about the uncontrolled demolition. So let's be very careful here. Rosie's scenario here is writing to us about the uncontrolled demolition. And really, even the controlled demolition doesn't avoid these things. This is the physics. This article is about the physics of why we are going into a demolition. This is the physics. This report came out of the IPCC, and delay means death. They're talking about the physics of why we are going into a demolition. I simply made the point so far in my last two videos that there are two kinds of demolition. Right? There's two kinds. You can have an uncontrolled demolition, and you can have a controlled demolition. And in an uncontrolled demolition, lots of people die, and you get nothing except random rubble. In a controlled demolition, lots of people still die, but you can try and save as many people as you can, and you can try and save as much of your civilization as you can during the demolition. Okay, so it's demolition, either pathway, but one of them you get nothing or you get random things, and something on the other side, the other pathway, the one I talked about yesterday, maybe you get more. Maybe you have some options to make sure some things are saved and some people are saved, and then you let go of the things that can't be saved. So here they're talking about demolition writ large. Delay means death. And so I want to read this, and they're not kidding. Now, for context, this is a IPCC report. We get the IPCC process runs every 6 or 8 years, and it's IPCC is an acronym. It stands for Intergovernmental. Remember that. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They convened in 1985, and they've been issuing reports every 6-8 years or so. They're not a real regular schedule. It's just when they think they need to. Summarizing all the climate science and issuing reports to governments to help them understand what the science indicates about the situation of humanity vis-a-vis the planet and the Earth dynamic system, and then there's also reports to help them understand what they have to do. We've had 6 reports so far in about 25 years or so, 30 years. We've had 6 reports, and each report is worse than the one before. The situation in the climate has gotten worse every single time. The warnings coming out of the reports are increasingly dire and increasingly blunt. This is sort of the second out of band or out of sequence report they've issued. I think that the scientists and the governments, this is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is run by governments and corporations. This reporting process, the IPCC process, and the reports that come out of it are commissioned by and edited by and really vetoed by governments and corporations, lobbyists, the whole rogues gallery that you would expect to be involved in this topic. And the IPCC process is criticized frequently as being political, and the results are criticized frequently as being watered down, because every nation on Earth is part of the IPCC process, including the oil-producing and natural gas-producing nations, and all the manufacturing nations, and all of the, like China, and all the consumer nations. Everybody has veto power. The fact that these reports exist at all is monumental evidence that there is a huge problem. The fact that these reports come out and say that there's an issue with the climate, and we're in big trouble, and there are limits to how far we can go forward on this in this way. The fact that these reports exist and they see anything at all is a major testimony to how bad the situation is, because the governments don't have to tell us anything. And the corporations that run many of these governments, including our own, have absolute 100% veto power on anything published. And they've been publishing these reports. The governments and the corporations and the oil-producing nations and the oil-producing corporations have been publishing these reports. I guess they're assuming nobody will read them. Okay, maybe that's true. I guess they're assuming the press will never cover them. That may be true. Well, here's one that came out today. It was issued today. This is not the normal IPCC report. It is an interim report, and I think we're probably going to have interim reports with increasing frequency, because the regular reporting cadence that analyzes all the scientific data every X number of years or decades, that's the cadence for analyzing science, summarizing the science. But the cadence for reporting on what's happening on the ground is going to have to become shorter because things are happening faster. The usual joke in climate change circles for people like myself who monitor this sort of thing and go into chat rooms and discuss it among ourselves, the usual meme, the joke is, every report now that we see and every scientific paper that comes out that we are privy to always has the same verbiage inside of it. Usually in the summary, usually in the first paragraph, usually in the first 3 lines. And it always goes something like this. It's worse than expected. It's happening sooner than expected. The impacts are more widespread than expected. And what they're copying to is that scientists are being blindsided. Now, it's not really scientists. The scientists in the field are shaking in their boots. This has been the case for at least a decade that I can point to. Scientists in the field, when you talk to them frankly and ask them, so what's going on? They say it's bad. I can't remember his name right now. Jason, I can't remember his name. He's a young climatologist, young at the time. And he was working on Greenland, and he came out with the famous "we're fucked" quote. Now, it was 10 years ago, Jason Box. He came out and said, I'm studying the cryosphere and we're fucked. Okay, that's what he said. He's never said that since, because I'm pretty sure his advisor, you pushed him back into a corner and said, Jason, you can't talk like that. If you talk like that, you're not going to get funding for your projects. So he doesn't say that anymore. But when I see pictures of Jason Box, who once said, we're fucked, he looks like an old man at this point. So he's not saying it, but he's showing it. This just came out on CNN today, on the 6th day of the Third World War. Great timing, guys. No accident, I'm sure. Delay means death. We're running out of ways to adapt to the climate crisis, new report shows. New report from the IPCC. Here are the key takeaways. I guess delay means death isn't one of them. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to do a Sam Mitchell. I'm going to insert commentary on it where I feel is important to bring context. You can go to CNN and you can look this up. Rachel Ramirez is the reporter. It's February 28th, 2022. Here we go. Climate change is on course to transform life on Earth as we know it, and unless global warming is dramatically slowed, billions of people and other species will reach points where they can no longer adapt to the new normal, according to a major report published Monday. So I don't call it global warming anymore. I'm in the camp where we should be calling it global heating. These are not warming events that are going to cause us trouble. These are heating events. They're not going to be, the deaths are not going to be attributed to it was a warm day. It's going to be attributed to it was too hot to survive. These were hot days. And the globe is heating. Okay, it's not warming. And I'm not going to call it global warming. That was cooked up by lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry. They also cooked up the term climate change, in case you didn't know. They did. They admit to that. They admit to that. The other thing you have to watch for in these reports, and I know I'm cutting this to ribbons, but I'll go back and I'll read it again, but I have to start clarifying things. The other thing you have to start watching for in all of this reporting and verbiage is the word unless. Okay, unless. I'm only sure where they squeeze this in. Climate change is on course, the same paragraph. Climate change is on course to transform life on Earth as we know it. And unless global warming is dramatically slowed, billions of people and other species will reach points where they can no longer. Okay. This little gratuitous and unless global warming is dramatically slowed. Here's my advice to you. Every time you see a sentence like that, or the word like that, just the word unless, just kind of popped in there, parenthetically, between commas and the whole thing. It's like almost like the editor added it while the article was going to press. The editor just kind of inserted this little caveat, unless, okay? You can just take that out. You just take that out, there's no unless, or anything like it. And I'll be pointing that out if it occurs here again. It probably will, because they do it all the time. They do it all the time. It's called sandbagging. They're basically throwing something in here. You're going to read this sentence. If you read the sentence without the word unless, you're going to lose your fucking mind. Okay? But there is no unless. Let me read it without the implied escape hatch. Okay? Climate change is on course to transform life on Earth as we know it. Billions of people and other species will reach points where they can no longer adapt to the new normal. No implied unless. This is just how it's going to be. Transform life on Earth as we know it, and billions of people and other species will reach points where they can no longer adapt to the new normal. Can no longer adapt. Can no longer adapt. Billions of people can no longer adapt. It's just it. There's no unless. We are in this. There's no unless global warming is dramatically slowed. Yes, I understand the editor has to have that in there because otherwise people are going to be writing CNN and saying, hey, I feel like committing suicide right now. What are you writing? What are you putting out here for people to read? So they have to slip that in there, that little gratuitous unless. It's completely gratuitous because it's not based on anything. It's just thrown in there. I could change it to, unless we start collecting unicorn farts. I mean, unless anything you want, any other verbiage you want to put in here, unless monkeys fly out of my butt. Okay, unless something weird happens, people and species are going to fail. They fail to adapt. Because the unless is always a random piece of shit. Nothing's going to happen unless global warming is dramatically slowed. We're not slowing global warming or global heating. We're not slowing global heating. We're not doing that. We're not doing it now. We're not going to do it in the immediate future. And at some point, we're not even going to have control of that process. Not that we do now. We probably lost control 30, 40 years ago. Maybe 40 years ago, we were still in the driver's seat and we could have slowed global heating. Not now, not today. So dramatically slowing global heating, no, that is not on the table. That is just not on the table. The physics does not pencil out anymore. The physics of slowing global heating does not pencil out. There's no spreadsheet on which you can actually get that to happen. And the entirety of the IPCC reports have been saying we have to slow global heating and do this and do that. And if you look at the spreadsheets and the numbers they're working on, it's not there. The IPCC reporting process has actually, and they've been criticized for this for the last two reports running, they actually have to invoke magic to control global heating. There have been in the last two reports, they have resorted to appeals to magic. And that's how it's being described. Their contingencies that we are going to do something enormously important about global heating. When scientists look at that and say, what is this doing in here? They criticize it as on the scientific basis as appeals to magic. So when they write here, unless global warming is dramatically slowed, the way you read that is, that's an appeal to magic at this point. Or divine intervention, or a miracle of some kind, or unicorns, or whatever you want to call it. It's an appeal to magic. Because we can't do that. We can't dramatically slow global heating. We can't do that. It's not, the laws of physics rail against it. And when you go to your spreadsheet to put in some numbers that show that we're dramatically decreasing global heating, the only mechanism you can do to justify the modifications you're making to your spreadsheet is a line about magic. And it's getting warmer, 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 and then magic happens. And now it's going down. That's what it really is. The scientists call it that. It's an appeal to magic. So we can just leave this unless out completely because it's an appeal to magic. Climate change is on course to transform life on Earth as we know it. And billions of people and other species will reach points where they can no longer adapt to the new normal, according to a major report published Monday by the IPCC. The UN-backed report, based on years of research from hundreds of scientists, decades of research by tens of thousands of scientists, but we'll roll with that, found that the impacts from human-caused climate change were larger than previously thought. There it is. Sooner than expected, worse than expected. The report's authors say these impacts are happening much faster. There it is again. And are more disruptive and widespread than scientists expected 20 years ago. There you go. Now, not all scientists. There have been people who for 20 years have been losing their fucking minds over this. But the scientists that work for the governments and the scientists that work for Exxon and the scientists that work for Saudi Arabia, are suddenly shocked and amazed. Oh, I'm so shocked and amazed. Jason Box isn't shocked and amazed. He was the one saying, we're fucked, okay? No, not all scientists are shocked and amazed today that it's happening faster than expected, more disruptive and more widespread than we expected 20 years ago. Okay, maybe it's news to CNN and rosy scenario, but it's not news to the rest of us. The authors point to enormous inequities in the climate crisis, finding that those who contribute the least to the problem are the worst affected, and warned of irreversible impacts if the world exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming above an industrial baseline. Now, those who contribute least to the problem are the worst affected. That's why we get an uncontrolled demolition. If we were worried about ourselves, the white people living in the industrialized North, we'd be all over this, but we're not. Because the people who contribute the least to the problem, the developing world, the global South, the imperial periphery, are the worst affected. And good luck finding a soccer mom. Who cares about that? Good luck. You're not going to be able to do it. And by the way, they say, it's going to be bad if the world exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming above a pre-industrial baseline. James Hansen in the late 80s was doing work that said that we'd be screwed if we were above 1.0, which we are now. And there are people who are saying right now, actually, we're so close to 1.5 degrees Celsius above global baseline, while we basically are above 1.5. And even if we pulled out all the stops today, right now, we would certainly go to well over 1.5, no matter what we did. We're headed towards that. We're going to go over 1.5. So we can stop. We can stop with this unless we keep below 1.5 degrees C above baseline, because we're not going to do that. So this is another implied unless that we have a hard line in the sand. We're not going to cross this line, and we have to do something drastic. Because we might cross 1.5. Actually, we're already doing that. So you can stop imagining that we're not doing that, because we are. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called the report, quote, an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership, and he warned that delay means death. That's right. I got to hand it to the General Secretary Antonio Guterres. He has been on message with this whole thing. For every time I hear him, he's definitely not reading the script written by Rosie Scenario. Okay. He is on message that the governments of the world are not doing the right thing. The scientists of the world are being ignored. The IPCC is sandbagging their own reports, and delay means death. That's the Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the UN. Delay means death. No joke. Not a joke, people. Not a joke. Now, my only caveat would be, again, delay means death implies unless. Unless we change our behaviors, people are going to die. Once again, let's just strike out that implied unless. Okay, the delay means death. People are going to die. People are going to die. You're going to get more death and destruction of culture and diversity in an uncontrolled demolition than you're going to get in a controlled demolition. In fact, one of the things that could come out of a controlled demolition is that we deliberately set out to maintain as much culture and human diversity as we possibly can. That could be one of the major goals of a controlled demolition, is to maintain as much diversity and cultural integrity as possible. It's the Noah's Ark approach, right? A controlled demolition is we're going to get two of everything, and by everything we mean everything. We're going to get two of everything. We're going to make sure everything is represented on the ark, and after the flood, we're going to unload the ark, and we're going to be diminished, but we're going to be intact. That's the Noah's Ark approach, controlled demolition. Now, that is my recommendation. We should be doing a controlled demolition and deliberately, as a strategy, preserving as much diversity and cultural representation as possible for our own benefits. Not because it's fair or it's just, but simply as a survival strategy. And if you decided to do a controlled demolition, you could do that. If you do an uncontrolled demolition, you will have no control over what you get at the end. Now, you're going to get a lot of rich white people. Okay, that was my point yesterday. You're going to get a lot of rich white people. You won't have any control over that. Okay, that's better than nothing, right? Let's just all admit that a bunch of rich white people living on super yachts in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that's better than nothing. Point taken. 80 million people, all of them rich, all of them multimillionaires and billionaires, surviving climate change and repopulating the earth from that foundation is better than extinction. Point taken. But if we were to deliberately do this, and we were to build an ark of some abstract kind and preserve as much diversity and as much of the human experience as we could, that would be better. That's my contention. Now, you're not going to get that by default. You're going to get that only if you plan on getting that. Otherwise, by default, you get 80 million or 160 million rich white people living in castles and super yachts and on the planet Mars. Okay, thank you, Elon. The Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the UN says that delay means death. No, death is death. We are getting death. Delay means an uncontrolled demolition. Now, I think probably at some point he's going to get to that point. He's going to get to that realization. He's going to get to the realization that actually delay is not do we die or do we not die. Delay is now the choice of types of demolition. Are we going to have an uncontrolled demolition where we just get whatever we get at random? Or are we going to take a controlled demolition and we're going to preserve as much of the human experience as we possibly can? He's going to eventually get to that point because he's a smart guy. But right now, he still thinks, bless his heart, at least he's thinking, right? He still thinks that our choices are between death and survival. We can go forward in survival and dodge the bullet, or we're going to die. Sorry, Secretary General, we're going to die. We are now going to die. We've been on the death glide path for a long time, and now we just have a choice between an uncontrolled demolition or the preferred, like nice to have, controlled demolition. Continuing to quote him, the facts are undeniable. This abdication of leadership is criminal. The world's biggest polluters are guilty of arson of our only home. Well put. He also said that current events Showed the world was too reliant on fossil fuels, calling them a dead end, and an apparent reference to the Ukraine conflict and the energy crisis. That's a big deal. The crisis in Ukraine is all about fossil fuels. I alluded to that yesterday. Maybe I'll explain how that's the case, but that is absolutely the case, and he's pointing to the same thing. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia is because of Germany's dependency on natural gas from Russia. And Germany's dependency on natural gas from Russia is because they signed the Paris Climate Accords, which required them to cut back on their consumption of coal. So they had to turn to Russia for natural gas. And when they turned to Russia for natural gas, that gave a green light to Russia to invade Ukraine, because no one's going to fuck with Russia because Germany is dependent on Russia for natural gas. A, B, C, D, dots connected. Here are the report's key takeaways after this idea that, delay is death, which I think is pretty key. There's about 5, okay? First, key takeaway. Warming beyond 1.5 degrees could have irreversible consequences. There's an implied unless there. We are already at beyond 1.5, so let's get ready for irreversible consequences. This is the way I would rephrase that. Now, some of their irreversible consequences are really not consequential. Is it going to be, are the soccer moms going to lose their minds because we lose the Great Barrier Reefs? No. Biologists will lose their minds. Oh, and the economies that depend on tourism to the Great Barrier Reef, they'll lose their minds. They'll lose everything. But are the soccer moms in Los Gatos going to lose their minds over the loss of the Great Barrier Reefs? No. Is there anything else we might lose? Let me think. Could I come up with something else that we might lose that the soccer moms in Los Gatos are going to lose their mind over? Yeah, I could come up. It's a long list, folks, okay? I like to tell my wife, because we're in the 6th mass extinction caused by human behavior, entirely, 100% by human behavior, we are going to lose every type of animal you can name. So my wife is not a zoologist or a biologist. She's just a common person. And so she can't name that many animals. But, every animal she could name, giraffes, rhinoceroses, elephants, ground sloths, everything she could name will be lost in the 6th mass extinction. It's, would the soccer moms living in Los Gatos in their mansions, would they care about that? No, they wouldn't. No. As long as they get the latest model of Tesla SUV, they're fine. They really are. So I don't know how we come up with these lists of things that are going to matter to people if we lose them, because we're going to lose them. And are the soccer moms going to care? No. Scientists have warned for decades that warming needs to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Actually, the first warning was it needed to stay below 1.0 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So this is called moving the goalposts. Since we exceeded 1, well, we can't have that be where the problems start. Let's move it to 1.5. Oh, and they're already talking about actually 2.0 is where we absolutely cannot cross the line, 2.0. So they're just going to keep moving the goalposts, and the closer we get to 2.0, it'll be, actually, it's 2.5. We absolutely must not cross 2.5. Actually, new data, we must not cross 3.0. Meanwhile, hypercanes and tornado clusters and heat domes and people are so struggling so hard to survive by the time we get to 2 or 2.5 that they're not even be paying attention anymore to what these people are saying. If you just keep moving the goalposts, you get to a point where you don't even have to move the goalposts anymore. Because all you're doing by moving the goalposts from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 is you're stalling when you have to do anything. And if you get to a point where people are actually dying in the streets and blah, 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 then you can't fake it anymore. So you don't have to move the goalposts. And maybe the people will be angry at that point and they'll say, hey, you kept moving the goalposts. We were probably in trouble back at 1.0 or 1.5. And now you're saying it's 2.5. And, the governments will say, well, we just didn't want to scare the horses. Yeah. We've been in trouble for a long time, but we didn't want to actually say we're in trouble. We wanted to say, unless we do something now, we're going to cross some imaginary threshold in the future. And it's always in the future, and it's always 20 years away. generational change. This generation is fine. The next generation will be screwed. In that future day when we cross that future line in the sand, and we just kept moving the goalposts so that it's only a problem in the future, and it worked. Y'all kept burning fossil fuels and buying tickets to Disneyland, and it worked. And the people who care, the 80 million white people, 80 million millionaires who inherit the earth, are perfectly fine with inheriting the earth. They're okay with that. They're fine with that. Good Lord, yeah, that's an amazing outcome. They get to inherit the earth. It's all theirs. What's left of it. Monday's report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, showed that if that limit is breached, some changes will be irreversible for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Again, if that limit is breached, we've already breached it, or we will in a couple of years, some changes will be irreversible for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So let's just clean that whole thing up. The changes we're seeing now are irreversible. They will be irreversible for hundreds, if not thousands of years, okay? They will be reversible actually for tens of thousands, if not millions of years, because that's how physics works. Sandbagging. This is Rosie Scenario. Rosie Scenario writes all these articles. Rosie Scenario writes the IPCC reports. I mean, the girl really gets around. And some changes may be permanent if the planet cools back down. Yeah, so if the planet ever cools back down, it's not. It can't. Physics doesn't work that way. How are you going to cool the planet? What are you talking about? Well, you got to turn off the sun? This is just not a thing, people. If the planet cools back down. If the planet cools back down, yeah, unicorns will cool the planet back down. You're appealing to magic. This is not how this shit works. It isn't. It's just not. Some changes may be permanent. Give me a break. Everything is permanent. The world is already at 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than before industrialization. It's higher than that. According to the IPCC's estimate, they're sandbagging, which is considered conservative. There you go. We are now rapidly barreling towards 1.5 degrees. Absolutely true. With every extreme event, ecosystems are being pushed more toward so-called tipping points beyond which irreversible changes can happen, according to the report. We're already having irreversible changes every single day. At warming of 2 degrees, for example, as many as 80% of all land species will be at high risk of extinction, according to the report. At 4 degrees, 50% of species are threatened. Okay, you can double all those. So at 2 degrees, 36% of all land species will be at high risk, I'm saying. And at 4 degrees C, all life on Earth is threatened. That's a fact. At 4 degrees C, above industrial baseline, all life on Earth is threatened. This has happened before. We've been here. Our planet has been there. Now, threatened doesn't mean that they go extinct. Threatened with extinction is what that sentence means. And at 4 degrees C above baseline, 100% of species are threatened with extinction. Now, 100% includes us, and that's a fact. If we allow this shit show to continue to where we are 4 degrees in excess of baseline Earth temperature, we are among the species threatened with extinction. Doesn't mean we're going to become extinct, but we're threatened with extinction, meaning you're in line, and that line that you're in goes to the door marked extinction, okay? Quote, there are many challenges already with 1.5 degrees C for several systems that we know about, said Hans Otto Portner, a co-chair on the report and a scientist at the Alfred Wegener Institute Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. Clearly, for coral reefs, we must say that in many locations, they are already beyond tipping points. They are on the downside. They're going away. Coral reefs are going away. Do you care? Well, Jacques Cousteau did a lot of great research on coral reefs, all those beautiful videos. You can always go find these things on YouTube. Go look up the old videos that David Attenborough did and all the others did on the coral reefs, and you can see the coral reefs. They were gorgeous. Now they're gone. At this point, they're gone. They're essentially what we call in biology functionally extinct. The coral reefs are functionally extinct. Doesn't matter that they're still there. They're doomed. Another example of how that works: if you have, one African elephant left and it's male, and all the other African elephants are dead, and you have one left and it's a male, and you don't have any females, then the African elephants are functionally extinct. They're not actually extinct because you've got one and it's a male, but they are functionally extinct because when that animal is dead, then they are technically extinct. Okay, they are actually extinct. Highly vulnerable ecosystems in the Arctic, mountains, and on the coast are at the greatest risk to see these changes, the authors say. Ice sheet and glacier melt will cause accelerated sea level rise, irreversible for centuries. No. Sea level rise is irreversible on the order of millions of years, tens of millions of years. Because to reverse sea level rise, you have to create ice, lots of it, trillions and quadrillions of tons of ice. Now, how do you do that? How do you create ice? You just warmed the planet. You just filled the atmosphere with CO2. It's going to take 1 million years to get rid of that CO2, and then you can start to cool the planet. And maybe at some point down the road, you can start having ice ages again. And when you start having ice ages and there's quadrillions and bazillions of tons of ice on land as a result, then the sea levels will drop. No, this doesn't happen in centuries, Rosie. You know that as well as I do. You don't reverse sea level rise ever in the history of eternity as far as we are concerned. Reversing sea level rise in centuries. Well, yeah, maybe 1 million centuries. Okay, I'm okay with that. Centuries, plural, 1 million centuries. Fine. No argument. Well done. Forests, peatlands, and permafrost, places where greenhouse gas is naturally stored, meaning CO2. They're being kind of fancy here. Risk being pushed into a situation where they are emitting those gases into the atmosphere, causing even more warming. So this is another implied unless. Risk being pushed into a situation where they are emitting those gases into the atmosphere. That's already happening. The permafrost is already in catastrophic decline. We will lose all the permafrost over the next 30 years. Ice is hard to melt. So I will allow for 30 years. But it's not actually the first 30 years of permafrost lost that destroys your planet. It's really the first 10. So we're not going to dodge a bullet here. Peatlands and forests, the forests are dying so fast we can't even keep up with the numbers. The Amazon is dying. It's turning into savanna, and the loss of the Amazon is irreversible. The boreal forests in Canada and Russia are dying. They're being eaten by bark beetles, and when you go into these forests, half the trees are dead. So there's no implied unless here, unless we do something. This is already happening. And the losses to these forests, in both the Amazon and the boreal forests, are irreversible for all practical purposes. Irreversible. So this is another set of changes that will last for, again, 1 million years. Or forever, all eternity. They will likely never return. Next point in their many points, we're running out of ways to adapt. You got to be careful with the word adaptation. Everywhere you see the word adaptation, you should insert in your mind, what are you talking about? Adaptation. Could you give me an example, please? Could you expand on that point, please? Okay, they're not going to do that. Adaptation, in quotes, they're going to give you a definition, is finding ways to live with the change, like putting up walls to ward off sea level rise or implementing new building codes to ensure homes can withstand more extreme weather. Ensure homes? Really? You're going to guarantee us that building codes are going to protect you from Category 7 hurricanes? Really? You're just going to code yourself right out of that problem, are you? Building codes, that's just going to do it. To ensure homes withstand more extreme weather. Oh, really? Building codes and stuff, we'll just write a building code. We'll write a building code. Please make all your buildings, this is code now, this is required by law, make all your buildings so that they can survive any kind of hurricane that ever happens. There you go. Rosie is a genius. I love how Rosie Scenario writes. She just throw these things in here, and the soccer moms Phew, building codes are going to save us from extreme weather. Well, that's just fine. I'll make sure that my house is built to codes. And when my house is built to codes, I got nothing to worry about. Phew, what a relief. Scientists note some of our adaptations have blunted the impact of the climate crisis so far, but they are not adequate in the long term. Our options to adapt will become even more limited at 1.5 degrees C above baseline, to say the least. And although the natural world has adapted to changing climates over millions of years, the pace of human-caused global warming, heating, is pushing many of the planet's most critical systems like rainforests, coral reefs, and the Arctic to the brink. How about critical systems, critical soccer moms, like agricultural areas or water collection areas, like the Grand Canyon watershed? How about critical areas like that? Why does it have to be the Arctic? And what's critical about the Arctic to soccer moms living in Los Gatos? I mean, the Arctic, most of those women can't even find the Arctic on the map. Or a rainforest or a coral reef. Couldn't locate them on the map. Couldn't put a pin in the map. Oh yeah, there's a coral reef here and there's a rainforest there. And wouldn't care to. Ma'am, could you come over here, please? Sir, could you come over here, please? Could you find the Great Barrier Reef on the map here? No? Can't bother? Okay, thank you. Here's a free cookie. And although the natural world has adapted to changing climates over millions of years, the pace of human-caused global warming is pushing many of the planet's most critical systems, like blah and foo and bar, to the brink. More extreme weather doesn't just affect humans, it is causing mass die-offs in plants and animals. And of course, you know that humans aren't animals, right? You knew that. That's why it's humans and animals. See what they did there? Humans and plants and animals. Population growth and development, which has not been carried out with long-term adaptation in mind, are also luring people into harm's way. As many as 3.6 billion people, call it 4, round figures, 4 billion people with a B, live in places already highly vulnerable to climate hazards, some of which will increase beyond the ability to adapt once the planet hits blah. Okay, 1.5 degree mark, but I'm trying to simplify this. We've already crossed the lines in the sand. So they have a number here, 1.5 degree mark. Then 4 billion people are in trouble. If we cross the 1.5 degree mark, then 4 billion people are in trouble. That's what this says. Okay, but James Hansen said when we cross the 1.0 degree mark, 4 billion people are in trouble. And 5 years from now, this same paragraph will read, if we cross the 2 degree mark, 4 billion people are in trouble. Now, I think at this point, you see the trend here. I think at this point, we can just simply say, there's no implied unless or if. 4 billion people are in trouble today, right now. 4 billion people are in trouble. That's half the human population of Earth. 4 billion people are in trouble. Already living in highly vulnerable to climate hazards, some of which will increase beyond the ability to adapt. Wow. 4 billion people are going to find themselves unable to cope with climate changes. And they are already there right now today. Because we are exceeding safe limits already today. A lot of the world's resources, particularly international finance, goes toward reducing greenhouse emissions, which is known as mitigation. I don't know about half. I don't think it's any. I don't know where they had half. At the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow, Scotland, last year, developing nations complained, that's us, that's me, complained that the richer nation, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Developing nations, we are the developed nations. The developing nations is the global south, the imperial periphery, whatever. Developing nations complained that the rich world, that is me, was failing to help adequate funding adaptation in their countries. Of course, the soccer moms aren't going to spend money on this. Quote, we have seen that the vast majority of climate finance goes towards mitigation rather than adaptation, said Adele Thomas, an author on the report and a climate scientist at the University of the Bahamas. So although adaptation is taking place, there is not enough funding, and it is not a high priority, which are then leading to these limits. It's debate. I'm going to be fair here about the money. It's debatable whether there's any amount of money you can throw at this and ensure adaptation. For example, sea level rise. If we get 10, 12 feet of sea level rise, all the coastal communities of the world have to be abandoned, all of them. Actually, we probably have to abandon half of them at even 2 feet of sea level rise. At 2 feet of sea level rise, half the coastal communities of the world have to be abandoned. And there is no adaptation. It's just too big of a problem. Now, I'm sure they can adapt, Manhattan, to survive 2 feet of sea level rise, but not 10 feet. They're done. They're at 10 feet of sea level rise. They're done. There's not going to be any Manhattan, except the part that's still above water. I mean, I guess you can keep that part, but the other parts are done. Same thing with San Francisco. A lot of San Francisco is going to be underwater at 10 feet of sea level rise. And San Francisco probably as a community is done. Oakland, a lot of refineries are at or below, sea level. And once the sea level rises very high and above what we can actually effectively block with walls, then they're done. And that's the end of the age of fossil fuels. When the refineries are underwater, they're done. So, throw money at this. You can talk about it. You can talk about throwing money at the problem. But really, I mean, honestly, can you really? What are you going to do? Buy air conditioning for every nomadic herdsman in Africa? What are you talking about here? How are you going to fund this? What are you going to buy for people that they can adapt where they are? Don't think so. Okay, here's what you could buy. Here's what you could buy with your money as climate change starts to bite. You can buy lots of shovels, dig lots of graves, and throw lots of people in them. You can spend your money doing that. Next point. Up to 3 billion people will experience chronic water scarcity. Up to 3 billion people. Again, double it. Every time they come up with these reports, they always say, in hindsight, it was we underestimated. They always do that. So let's double 3 billion to 6 billion. Around half of the world's population, today I guess, experiences severe water scarcity each year, in part due to climate-related factors. So they're already saying 50%. 50% of the world's population experiences severe water scarcity each year, in part due to climate-related factors, the report showed. So we're already at half. This is not even a future projection. Half the world's population experiences severe water scarcity each year. Half the world's population experiences severe water scarcity each year. That's not a projection. That's a fact. Water will become even more scarce at higher global temperatures. How can they become more scarce if half the people already don't have enough? They're already saying more scarce, so half the people don't have any? Maybe that's what they're talking about. Or maybe all the people don't have enough? Okay, so let's, look, I live here in California, one of the richest places on earth. We are already having severe water scarcity here in California. No joke. You can read the drought maps that they publish, and they republish every quarter. Half the state is in, extreme drought. Severe drought is actually one of the lower thresholds. They've even had to add more layers of annihilation on top of severe. We're in like extreme drought at this point. The entire state is in severe drought conditions. That's on a map somewhere in Sacramento. You can go look it up. California, 7th largest economy on the planet. At 2 degrees of warming, which scientists predict the planet will reach by mid-century, so cut that in half. Mid-century is 2050. We're currently 2020, round figures. So that's a 30-year difference. Cut that in half. It's a 15-year difference. So So we'll reach 2 degrees warming by 2035, round figures. I'd say that's optimistic. We probably reach 2 degrees warming before that, but certainly by 2035, not mid-century. No, not a chance. No chance at all. By mid-century, I don't even want to think about it. We're probably at 3.5. At 2 degrees of warming, as many as 3 billion people around the world will experience chronic water scarcity, according to the report. It increases to 4 billion people at 4 degrees. No, it increases to all the people on the earth at 4 degrees. I don't know how they come up with this shit. Water shortages will put enormous pressure on food production and increase the world's already dire food security challenges. Water shortages right now are putting enormous pressure on food production. I can't imagine what happens in the future. I guess we just don't have any food production except whatever you can grow in your backyard with the water you get from your allotment. A water crisis is already brewing in the western United States. Ha! Multi-year drought has drained reservoirs and triggered unprecedented water cuts for the region. Okay, well, I live in that region, and there are almost no water cuts. All of the targets are voluntary. I think that this summer, though, the axe is going to fall. This summer, the water managers who have been soft pedaling this whole thing as voluntary measures are fine, you should reduce your water consumption, we have a really big problem, but please don't panic, and definitely don't come at us with, rifles and pitchforks, because we're not going to make you do anything. You just be careful. Okay, that's the kind of thing we're getting right now. I think water cuts are coming this summer. I think the situation is so bad that you're going to turn on the tap and mud is going to come out. And by that point, they're going to say, oh, yeah, we do have a water crisis, don't we? Golly. Plunged to the country's largest reservoirs plunged to record lows in recent months, threatening water supply for tens of millions of people. Yeah. They didn't say it, but what they're doing is they're pointing at Southern California, looking at you, Southern California. 20 million people live in the LA Basin. Most of the Middle East is experiencing high levels of water stress, expected to worsen the more the earth warms, raising questions over how long those parts of the region will remain inhabitable. Worth repeating. Most of the Middle East is raising questions over how long those parts of the region will remain inhabitable. Uninhabitable means you can't live here. When an area becomes uninhabitable, people can't live there. That's what that means. You cannot habitate. This is not your habitat. It's uninhabitable. You have to leave. Now, I don't know how many people live in the Middle East. Again, a lot of them are filthy rich because of oil, so they will leave. They'll take their money and they'll leave. Some of them will come here, where I live, and they'll be buying up the real estate and trying to recreate their kingdoms, and they'll be doing it here. The report focuses on the interconnectedness between the Earth's ecosystems and humans, including how the climate crisis is altering water resources. Quote, what we really wanted to show is that ecosystems and all sectors of human society and human well-being fundamentally depends on water. Duh. To be a listener, a scientist at Climate Analytics and an author of the report told CNN. And it's not just the water resource itself that plays an important role in water security, but also what form and in what quality we can access it. And really showing how many different ways climate change really affects humans and ecosystems through various channels. So that's all a long-winded way of saying that you can have water, but it's not potable water. It's not drinkable. You can have water, but it's not water you can use for irrigating crops. You can have water, you can point to that and say, there's some water, but it's not enough to make your area habitable. Okay? So we don't need a situation where there's zero water. There's a threshold that you get closer and closer to where there's a point where your area becomes uninhabitable. There's not enough to drink. There's not enough to, have a family. There's not enough to have crops. There's not enough to have domesticated animals. There's water, but there's not enough. There's not enough to go around. Only a few people can survive. And that's not enough to have a civilization or a community. And so no one can live there. That's what that means. Next point. The people who are least responsible are the most affected. I'm almost inclined to skip this. I'll read it. It's just a statement. The people who are least responsible are the most affected. We can stop right there. What can we do about it? There's nothing we can do about it. These become sacrifice zones. These people are going to be sacrificed. The millions of years of evolution that got us as diverse and as widespread as we are, we're just going to throw it away. We're going to cut that off. We're going to cut off that part of our family tree and we're going to throw it away. That's what we're going to do. And the soccer moms are fine with that. Provided they can fill their swimming pool and their children are healthy and there's plenty of food coming into their community, they're fine with cutting off 50% of the human race. And that means most of the diversity and most of the culture and most of the languages and most of the history. We're just going to lop it off and throw it away. So I don't know if I have to even read this point. That's just what's going to happen. The people who are least responsible are most affected. Period. That's it. Half the world, and probably even 3/4 of the world, is going to be sacrificed. And the people who are responsible for that don't care. They just don't. And you have to understand that. I'm just going to skip it. Next point. We can still avoid the worst. No, Rosie, we can't. It's not true. We're dealing with physics. You just fell off a cliff. You can still avoid the worst. What's the worst? Hitting the bottom. You can't avoid that. We're on the way there. This is where I lose my shit. We can still avoid the worst. While many regions in the developing world are unable to adapt because of a lack of finance and capacity, adaptation is just not in the cards. You're going to have to leave. You're going to have money. Oh, you don't? Sorry. The IPCC singles out North America as a region where misinformation and politicization are a barrier. Well, we're not going to be affected by this. Well, I mean, we will be. South California is going to have to empty. The U.S. southern states are going to have to empty almost certainly. Probably the Midwest is going to become uninhabitable. Certainly not for crops. You can probably live there, but you probably can't have a farm. Yeah, well, it's going to affect us. And yet we are the most polarized and we have the most misinformation. Well, that's because we suck. That's led to a misunderstanding of how great the risk is and has polarized the response to the crisis, ultimately, quote, delaying urgent adaptation planning and implementation, the report's authors say. So, yeah, we suck. We are the ones pushing the entirety of the planet onto the path called uncontrolled demolition because we suck. In Europe, they note a lack of political leadership and a low sense of urgency are among the hurdles to overcome. Yeah, they also suck. Dare I say this? I'll say it. Everyone's going to unsubscribe, so I'm not going to say it. Read between the lines, bitches. But these are barriers that can be overcome. No, they can't. The authors say there is still a window of opportunity to implement meaningful action. No, there isn't. And it's closing fast. Yeah, it did. What else can I say? No, there is not a window of opportunity. It closed. James Hansen called it 20 years ago. We're screwed. The window of opportunity to do anything is closed. And we're still getting misinformation to this day. And we're still being irresponsible to this day. And we're fighting World War III so that Germany can get all the natural gas they want from Russia to this day. We're in the 6th day of World War III because of natural gas going to Germany. No, we're not going to make these changes. The door has closed. If we're willing to fight World War III so that soccer moms can have natural gas to heat their jacuzzis in Germany, then we're screwed. Okay, the Germans will be fine. The Germans will be fine, and most Americans will be fine, and the soccer moms in Los Gatos will be fine, and they can have Zoom calls and have a nice time with the soccer moms living in Germany. And the soccer moms of the world will inherit the earth. And that's our glide path. That's the glide path we are on right now, that the soccer moms will inherit the earth. Lovely. Just lovely. Quote, there are opportunities to adapt between now and 1.5 degrees C. We've already crossed 1.5, so I don't know where this between comes from. In addition to making deep cuts to heat trapping fossil fuel emissions, but as we go beyond 1.5, which will be next week, the opportunity space becomes much more constrained and reduces the effectiveness. Okay, so we're screwed. Shorter. Listeners said the report is, quote, an urgent call for action. We've had many of those now, for world leaders to move forward toward climate resilient development, resilient growth, which is going to require fossil fuels. See how they work that? Reducing emissions as low as possible, while also investing in adaptation to cope with the changes we already see. Rosy scenario at her best. Decision makers also need to be intentional, whatever that means here. That's a creative use of words. Decision makers also need to be intentional in helping the most disadvantaged communities and countries so no one gets left behind in the process. Wow, is that a mind fuck or not? Okay, let's look at this one. Decision makers, whoever they are, also need to be intentional. See, this was just dropped in here. This is the editor at CNN. The editor at CNN says, man, we can't end on this note. And the end note is the next paragraph. I know that this article is almost over. The end note, they have to put this in before the end, okay? Decision makers also need to be intentional in helping the most disadvantaged communities and countries so no one gets left behind in the process. What process? Which communities and countries? What do you mean no one? That's 100%. Are you serious? Helping. We're going to help the most disadvantaged communities. We're going to help them, okay? And the decision makers need to be intentional. Whoever wrote this did not intend to imply anything. This sentence, this one paragraph sentence, has no information content. It's gobbledygook. It's absolute gobbledygook. Decision makers also need to be intentional in helping the most disadvantaged communities and countries so no one gets left behind in the process. That's gobbledygook. That is not actionable. No, that's not pointing to anyone. That's not pointing to anything. That's not pointing to any action or any kind of priorities or anything at all. This is just gobbledygook. This sentence has no meaning. Quote, it's important for this to also be done on an inclusive or equitable manner, listener said, looking into how the most vulnerable regions can really be supported in adaptation. More gobbledygook. It's important for this to also be done in an inclusive or equitable manner. End. Full stop. So that was CNN. My girl, Rosie Scenario, doing her best to say the truth and not be alarming. This paper was issued by the IPCC on the 6th day of World War III. My guess is that they did that deliberately so that nobody would notice. They still got it out. They could still point to it later. They could say, what do you mean we didn't tell you? Look, here it is. And someone might notice at that point, oh, yeah, you released that on the 6th day or so of World War III. Did you really expect us to read it? Well, we didn't need you to read it. We just needed to release it. And so we did, and it just becomes absolute bullshit. It's just absolutely meaningless. And it was the UN Secretary General who said that delay means death. Delay means death. And there was nowhere in that article, that IPCC report, as summarized by CNN, there was nowhere in there that implied that delay means death. But delay means death. Actually, Antonio Guterres, I like the guy a lot. He seems to be a smart guy. His heart's in the right place. But I don't know how to tell him this. Death is what we're going to get. Lots of it. Lots of it. I alluded to that yesterday. This cannot be avoided. Delay means death. That's an implied unless. Unless we do something, people are going to die. I'm sorry. You're going to find out I'm right.